The first ever Tuscan Grand Prix plays host to round 12 of the 2008 GP4 Manager Series. The circuit, Mugello, sitting somewhere in the Tuscan hills, and on come the lights. On the left, pole sitter Jenson Button. On the right, the Super Aguri Fernando Alonso. 5 lights are on, 5 lights go out, and from pole position Jenson Button gets a reasonable start. Sato had a brilliant start from third on the grid. Is he going to do something about Button? He's already got Alonso, but now he's going to try and challenge Jenson Button into Sandanato from the inside, and Sato's got it! Takuma Sato taking the lead in the Honda, but Button's trying to hang on round the outside. Now through the left and the right, turns 2 and 3. Some of the corner names I don't fully know of Mugello, so we'll have to go by numbers for some of them, but into 4 and 5, and we've got yellow flags in the background, so someone has gone off, and look at that, Sebastian Vettel and another driver. It's a Williams, and you can see Vettel already lost a wheel on the approach to Sandanato. Who did he hit? Let's have a look. A Super Aguri of Massa, and then the Williams just collecting him in the aftermath. So Vettel's terrible season gets worse, and the Williams himself got collected by a Renault. I saw that there. Now, which one was the Renault? More importantly, it's Heidfeld in the Williams that's out. So he was the one that collected Vettel, and then the Renault took out the Williams wheel. So you can see the stranded cars, but in the lead, going through Casanova, is Takuma Sato, now into the 2 Arabiatas. First right very quick, and the second right slightly less radius but no less slow, and there's confirmation of Heidfeld and Vettel out of the race at the inside into, goodness me, that was going to be a bit of a tricky one for Button to make that one stick on Takuma Sato, as now we go into Correntaio, the long, more than 180 degree right-hander that's slightly cambered on the inside, so it's still very quick. And there is 4th place Kimi Raikkonen, so he's made up a couple of positions from his 6th place starting slot. Alonso's had a poor start from 2nd on the grid, he's down to 5th, but out of the final corner, Buccina, Takuma Sato, how far behind is Button, but more importantly, how is Kimi Raikkonen going to get past Mark Webber down the main straight? Can he do it round the outside into Sandanato? Webber's trying to squeeze him, and Webber's squeezed him successfully. And further back, I think Montoya was about to have a look at Alonso for 5th, as into the pits comes the Renault of Robert Kubica. So that was the Renault that ripped off the Williams' wheel. And Kubica obviously paying the price for that one, as through the first sector. Jenson Button's in the lead. Jenson Button's taken the lead off of Takuma Sato, who's down to 5th, so something happened to Sato at the exit of turn 3. Off the track goes the Japanese driver, and then rejoining right into the path of quite a few cars, but still in 5th place ahead of Felipe Massa, who's got his head of Juan Pablo Montoya in amongst that as well. So, Matthias Lauda in 8th place, his teammates still in 5th place, but now there's a queue, forming behind Takuma Sato going through the Arabiatas. As through the Arabiatas goes race leader Button. Massa going a bit wide at the first Arabiata, and losing himself 1 position to Juan Pablo Montoya in the BMW Sauber. There goes Montoya, there goes Massa, and the rest of the top 10 consists of Matthias Lauda and 2 Ferraris running 9th and 10th, Glock ahead of Sergio Perez. They qualified pretty much solidly in the midfield, and at the moment they are in the top 10 in the points, as Mark Webber has a slight lock-up going through Buccina, but hanging on to that Toyota as he exits the corner, and about to start lap 3. Now we've got 55 laps of this Mugello race, and usually it would be 57 or 58, so it's slightly shorter than normal, as, look at that, we've got a McLaren having a look at, or is that Alonso having a look at Raikkonen for 3rd place? I think it was, actually. Raikkonen was just 6 thousandths ahead as they crossed the start-finish line, as Albers, there he is in 12th place, having just been passed by Nico Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg's had a flying opening to this race. Where did he qualify on the grid? He was in 17th place, and he's already up to 11th. So that's a brilliant start for Hülkenberg. Obviously taking advantage of some of the chaos that happened with Vettel and Heidfeld and Kubica, and he's gained 6 places out of it. As slightly wide at the exit of Casanova, and through the Arabiatas, Hülkenberg has got Albers right behind him there. As 3rd place now Alonso. Alonso has just taken Kimi Raikkonen, and Raikkonen dropping way down the order. I think he's crashed. I think Kimi Raikkonen has crashed somewhere. And let's have the big traffic jam. What has happened? Raikkonen out of the race. So he has crashed it indeed. And there's a front wing missing for Sato, so there's Raikkonen made a mistake and then rejoined into the path of Sato. Maybe that's what's happened. McLaren's championship challenge starting to fall apart, especially in the last couple of races where the Toyotas have just stolen a march on the competition, although Button should be a bit further ahead. But the last race at Hungary was a bit of an anomaly. None of the 4 championship contenders actually finished for one reason or another. Sato and Button both suffered mechanical issues, while Webber and Raikkonen both crashed out at the turn 11 corner. That was a hot corner in that Hungarian Grand Prix, as that's Suttel going through the first sector and wrestling with his Force India a little bit. In that Hungarian Grand Prix, Suttel, from 14th on the grid, managed to win thanks to a very clever 2-stop strategy that the Force India took. In fact, Suttel, he was 14th on the grid, and hung on to that one ahead of second Alonso, third. That driver there, Rubens Barrichello, put in another storming drive, but he's very wide at whichever corner he's just gone through. I think that's the first and second Arabiatas that he's just gone through. So he's going to turn right and then left, and then it should be the end of the second sector point. It is, yes. Rubens Barrichello making his way through Correntaio now. And further back, Sergio Perez has lost a couple of positions to Albers and Suttel as Kubica goes through the Arabiatas, having rejoined from that unscheduled pit stop. And let's just quickly review the top order now. So Jenson Button leads, having started from pole position, and lost that lead at the start, but regained it very quickly from Sato after the Japanese driver made that mistake at the exit of turn 3 on the second lap. But Sato's race having gone much worse after I suspect Raikkonen had crashed out and then got collected by Takuma Sato. And speaking of Raikkonen, actually, he was involved in another incident in Hungary where I think he ended up with a lost rear wing in the early stages of the race. I assume he went off the track at turn 11 in the early part of the race and then was collected by Sebastian Vettel and possibly another car as well. So I suspected whether it was an early mechanical gremlin for Raikkonen that caused him to make an early pit stop, but it was in fact damaged rear wing. And in this race, he's obviously out of the race. And look at this kerfuffle. We've got Hamilton being overtaken by Rubens Barrichello for 16th place. There's another traffic jam right in front. And who is at the head of that? Well, there's 6 cars, including the one we're on board with Hamilton. Maybe his 7th car, actually, just in front. But there's certainly drivers pushing hard in the early stages. And who else have we got? We've got Hulkenberg in 8th now, ahead of the 2 Force Indias, as Massa has just taken... he's battling with Montoya for 4th place. That was going through the main straight. And then the 2 Toro Rossos having a battle for 13th place. We're going to keep an eye on the action first before I do a slightly more detailed recap, as Rubens Barrichello struggles to hit the apex and in fact doesn't even hit it at all at San Donato. He is chasing the drivers in front of him. I think there's a Red Bull in there. It must be off the tracks goes somebody. I think it was a Toro Rosso. Hamilton had just overtaken Barrichello for position, and then the Toro Rosso in front making a mistake at the exit of 3. As Mark Webber goes through Correntaio now, and now we switch back to the 2 Force Indias having a go at each other. That's going in between Arrabbiata and Correntaio. That's his turn 10 and 11. As we switch to Paul Di Resta in 13th place. I think he was the driver that made that minor mistake at the exit of turn 3. And he's going through Correntaio now. Quick little pit path left and right as Button sets a new fastest lap and pulls out a 4-second lead over Mark Webber. Toyota really stealing the march in terms of pace in the past 3 races. Though they couldn't quite capitalise on that in Hungary. Both drivers retiring. So Hungary did see Suttel win from Alonso and Barrichello. That was your top 3. Then Albers making it 2 Force Indias in the top 4. A tremendous result for them. Who was in 5th place, I wonder. It was Kobayashi in 5th. He'd also taken a 2-stop strategy, but hit the tyres on his McLaren fading a bit towards the end of the race. And then 6th place, the Toro Rosso of Daniel Ricciardo. He was actually a very, very serious contender for a podium. maybe even a win if things had gone his way, but I think he suffered a mechanical drama immediately after his second of 3 pit stops, so he had to make that a 4-stop race. 7th was Nick Heidfeld, 8th was Paul di Resta, and with him getting points in that race, all drivers had scored points in this season so far. 9th place Felipe Massa, and 10th was Sergio Perez. But it was quite a chaotic affair in Hungary, quite a lot of offs and mistakes and incidents. Most notably Mark Webber, who cost himself a chance at the race win, well, probably a 2nd place actually. He was with Fernando Alonso at the time. Back to the action for a bit, and Felipe Massa's just taken 4th off of Montoya, and Suttil getting ahead of Albers, I think that was, on the bottom of the ticker that you can see at the bottom, which gives you updates on times and sectors and the gaps between each of the runners. And Montoya, oh, that's a bit too wide for Montoya going through. That's 4 and 5, I think. Yeah, he's really struggling. Is that an issue developing for Montoya as he tries to defend from Hulkenberg going through the Casanova complex? But he's down to 7th place at the moment, and by the looks of it, overdriving it a bit. That just sums up Montoya's season, to be honest. Although last time out in Hungary, it wasn't his fault. He suffered a mechanical issue whilst running quite strongly. I do happen to know BMW Sauber are running the hard tyres for this race, as are McLaren. It certainly didn't do Kimi Raikkonen much good. Yellow flags. Who has gone off somewhere? This is lap 8. Oh, is it Montoya again? Has he overdriven and crashed off again? Yes, he has. Montoya, just as I said that he was overdriving his car, he's just gone and spaffed it at the Correntaio corner. So Montoya's season really in the doldrums, as we see Takuma Sato 17th place. About to approach the final corner, Buccina. And I'll do a minor recap of the championship as it stands at the moment, because Jenson Button holds a 22-point lead over Sato and Raikkonen. And if it stays like this, he's going to take a mammoth chunk towards his first ever championship. But there's still a fair bit to go. We're not even in double digits in terms of the number of laps completed. We're only on lap 9, so still quite a long way to go. 4th in the championship at the moment is Mark Webber, sits on 102 points. Then Suttil's win moved him up to 5th ahead of Fernando Alonso. Both those two having a nice battle for 5th in the championship, separated by just 4 points. Suttil 73 and Alonso on 69. As Toro Rosso has got a queue of cars behind him, he got a little bit out of shape going through the Casanova complex. Oh, Hulkenberg! Is that Hulkenberg and Suttil having an incident somewhere? Well, let's find out as Di Resta. And Suttil's out with an accident, but it could well be a collision. There is Suttil. And I saw Hulkenberg. Yeah, he's out as well. Both BMW Saubers once again out of the race. This season it's just not been theirs at all. And there's your Hungarian and Oceanian Grand Prix winner out of the race, being wheeled back and craned away. And as Albers had an incident as well, because Albers is dropping way down the order as well. He's pitting. Albers into the pits. So the first 10 laps have seen a smorgasbord of incidents. So we could be in for a pretty eventful race at Mugello. Obviously the rate of mistakes at this circuit set rather highly, as Jenson Button has his own mistake going through between its turn 10 and 11. So even the race leader's not infallible to a few minor mistakes here and there as he goes through Correntaio. And he lost 1.5 seconds to Mark Webber in that one little mistake. And Fernando Alonso 4th place, Alonso in 3rd, Massa now 4th, so both Super Aguris well up there in 3rd and 4th place. And with Force India having a difficult race with Suttil out and Albers in early, then they could be leapfrogging Force India in the battle for 4th in the championship. As it stands between those two, it's just 6 points separating those two. Toyota are long gone. They are 82 points ahead of McLaren, and McLaren are 10 points ahead of Honda in the Constructors' Championship. There's Mark Webber in 2nd place. He's 3.6 seconds behind Jenson Button, as Di Resta and Hamilton are about to go into battle, and Di Resta going off the circuit and spinning at Buccina. And is he going to be collected? Is he going to rejoin safely? Well, at the moment his view is obscured by the marshal's post, but he's rejoined in the middle of the inside of the corner, now back on the circuit, and all is good for at least another corner. There's a Renault looming large, that must be the recovering Kubica. Let's just quickly recap the top 10 as Ricciardo goes through 4 and 5 into Casanova. He's got Kamui Kobayashi right behind him. And Ricciardo's a bit all over the place through Casanova into Arrabbiata. And out of Arrabbiata. He's a little bit safe for now, but if Ricciardo is a bit ragged, then he must surely become under pressure from Kamui Kobayashi. That's the battle for 7th. So, quick recap. 2 Toyotas, first and second. And lapping quickly, Jenson Button quicker than anyone else so far as he goes into San Donato, but he's obviously pushing hard because I think he was in Imola by the way he missed that apex. As Mark Webber's now 4 seconds behind Alonso, 4.7 behind Mark Webber in 3rd place, and Massa another 4 seconds behind, this time on his own teammates. Matthias Lauda's up in 5th place, so he's upholding Honda honour at the moment. Timo Glock is up to 6th place, so decent drive from him so far. Daniel Ricciardo 7th, Kamui Kobayashi 8th. Joe Bianchi in 9th, so he's the one upholding Williams' honour with Heidfeld out of the race on the first lap. Barrichello 10th and Sergio Perez in 11th place. But we're going to have a little counter as to how many drivers have retired, because it could be a very high attrition rate this particular race. And the retirements so far, well, you got Sebastian Vettel out of the race, Nick Heidfeld out of the race, Kimi Raikkonen out, there's 3 so far. And then Hulkenberg and Adrian Sutil and Juan Pablo Montoya, that's your 6 so far. There could be a few more that I may have missed out. And we're only on lap 12, about to enter lap 13 actually, as Jenson Button starts a new lap. He'd lost half a second to Mark Webber on that lap thanks to his running wide moment at San Donato. As we look at Christian Albers going through the Arrabbiata corners, so a lot of drivers already more than half a lap behind Button, so we could be seeing quite a few lapped runners in this race. And Massa starting to catch up to Alonso. He was 0.3 quicker than the Spaniard on that lap, so we could be seeing a battle for 3rd between the Super Guris if it carries on like this. Paul Di Resta 14th, Kubica 15th, Albers 16th, so yes, 6 retirements in this race. Both BMW Saubers, the other Force India of Adrian Sutil, Sebastian Vettel, Nick Heidfeld and Kimi Raikkonen. Kimi Raikkonen, the most significant retirement out of them all, and if things go badly, as in the 2 Toyotas win the race, then Kimi Raikkonen, I think his championship challenge must surely be fading. Even though there's 6 races still to go, and McLaren haven't used that many upgrade tokens, they've still got 75, is the word I'm hearing, tokens to use. And the team boss of McLaren tells me that he has got a bit of a plan as to where the upgrade tokens are being spent, which you can do after this particular race. Plus there will be a mid-season test session coming up. That's a Toro Rosso who has got a Renault and a Force India behind. It's Paul Di Resta with Robert Kubica and Christian Albers. 3-way battle for 14th and effectively last place. Those are your 3 drivers who are running in 14th, 15th and 16th. Ahead of those 3, you've got Takuma Sato, who had to come into the pits for a new front wing after collecting Kimi Raikkonen at the exit of... It's the exit of turn 11. There is a corner name for that, but I'm not 100% sure of what it is. I'll tell you what, I'm going to load up the Mugello circuit on one of my devices so that I can tell you all the corner names, because I prefer corner names to numbers. There's Mark Webber going through a corner which at the moment I do know the name of, Correntino, little pith path, and then into Bacina. And he is 4 seconds once again behind Jenson Button. And so it appears that Jenson does have the quicker car at this stage of the race. And a 3-way battle going through Casanova and Cervelli. The left-hander is the Cervelli corner. and the Arrabbiatas. So then at turns 10 and 11, it's Scarperia and Pelagia. And Pelagia is the exit, and that would have been where Kimi Raikkonen crashed it. Christian Albers going through Pelagia and into Corintaya. And here's Fernando Alonso, third place. That's going through Materassi and Borgo San Lorenzo. Turns 2 and 3, by the way, Luca and Poggio Secco. Or Poggio Secco, depending on how you pronounce 2 G's in Italian. As out of the Buccina corner and onto the main straight, that was a poor exit from Paul Di Resta, and he has got Robert Kubica looking at him from the left, but look at this, where is this going to go? Because it could be 3 wide at some point going through San Donato. And it's the Force India of Christian Albers who gains a position over Robert Kubica. But while they're at San Donato, the first corner, Jenson Button is exiting Buccina, the last corner, so Jenson Button is nearly a lap ahead of those 3. And Paul Di Resta going through Materassi and Borgo San Lorenzo. And he's defending going into Casanova and Cervelli, so he's obviously feeling the pressure from Christian Albers behind now. And through Arrabbiatas, legendary corners. In real life, that's where Lance Stroll had his puncture and a fairly sizable accident, and definitely knocked the wind out of his sails. And I think he was about to be under pressure from Albers at that point, going through... which corner was that? I think that was through Pelagia, and in fact he's wide at Corintaya, and Albers takes that 14th place, and Kubica takes 15th, so now Paul Di Resta's gone from 14th to 16th and last place. Points in the previous race, but he'll do well to score points unless the attrition rate does prove to be extreme at this Tuscan circuit. That is obviously very difficult to drive on. 4.3 seconds, the lead gap between Jenson Button and Mark Webber going through Buccina. Interesting that the Button doesn't take the extreme outside going into Buccina. Obviously, he prefers to take an early entry into that final corner. And while Paul Di Resta off the track, and that's going through Poggio Secco. So obviously Paul Di Resta struggling a bit with his Toro Rosso. Yeah, I just want to go back to McLaren and the upgrade tokens, and to a certain extent BMW Sauber. BMW Sauber have used 75 out of their 100 upgrade tokens. That's the number I'm receiving. And they've got 25 left to use going into the final 6 races. Obviously Montoya has done quite well in qualifying, but obviously overdriving it in the races. And I've also been told that there's no real risk of his seat being under threat from test driver Pastor Maldonado. So, by the sounds of it, Montoya and Hulkenberg with the team until the very end of the season. And in terms of where the upgrade tokens are going to go for BMW Sauber, there is an option that you can upgrade their driver ability as well, so I suspect the BMW Sauber team may well go for that, as we've obviously seen both drivers struggling to stay on the circuit in the races. So it'll be interesting to see how that upgrade token works out, if indeed the boss of the BMW Sauber team goes ahead with that. Here's a look at Kamui Kobayashi in 8th place, and he's dropped back behind Daniel Ricciardo now. It's 2.7 seconds, the gap between Ricciardo and Kobayashi, so a few laps ago it looked as if Kobayashi was going to challenge the Toro Rosso, but now he's dropped back a little bit. That's Fernando Alonso, who's now 7.1 seconds behind Mark Webber. The two Toyotas really are streaking away at the front, and they've obviously been a bit reliable as well. I mean, not usually, but in terms of the retirements that they've had, they've mostly been accidents, particularly for Mark Webber. He had a collision at Donington with his own teammate, going through the old hairpin. And then, obviously, in the last race, Mark Webber crashed out of the race at turn number 11. Jenson Button's car did break down going into... It was at the exit of turn 2, as Di Resta has a bit of a lock-up going into Buccina. If we're going to be seeing Di Resta quite a lot, it's probably going to be a load of minor mistakes. And he dropped 6/10 to Robert Kubica on that particular lap thanks to that mistake. And as he goes through San Donato, Button is probably going to start another lap just about there. And Webber now 5.1 seconds behind as we look at Sergio Perez, 12th place, behind Lewis Hamilton now. So Lewis Hamilton's making his way through the field. And it seems as if Red Bull's pace has dropped off a little bit. They're struggling to score points as Webber gets it a bit wide going through Luca, and now Poggio Secco. And now into Materassi and Bogo San Lorenzo. An even quicker version of the second and third corners. Really highlights the direction change that these cars experience, particularly that one, Casanova and Cervelli. Now Jenson Button. Going through 10 and 11, I've just about forgotten that one. It is Scarperia and Palagio, I think, as Jules Bianchi has a battle with Rubens Barrichello. I think Rubens was having a go at the Williams driver, but the Frenchman hanging on to 9th place at the moment. What's the gap? 4.4 seconds behind Kamui Kobayashi, but the more interesting gap is between himself and Rubens Barrichello. Now Sato's making his way back up the field. He's past Sergio Perez for 12th place. His next target, Lewis Hamilton, 11th place. Going through Arrabbiata 1, very fast. Arrabbiata 2, just as fast. And where is he going to make the move on the Red Bull driver? Is he going to do it into Cervelli? That'd be a brave one. That's not Cervelli, it's Scarperia. 10 is Scarperia. So, Paul Di Resta back to see what he's up to. And he's going through Borgo San Lorenzo. There's some non-alcoholic beer being advertised on the side of the circuit. And some Portaloos as well, in between Cervelli and Arrabbiata 1. Into the pits for his first scheduled pit stop comes Daniel Ricciardo. So, 7th place Ricciardo, pitting on the end of lap 19, that'll be. At the moment we are on lap 20, so already gone past 1/3 distance. It's going to be a bit of a quick race as Bianchi versus Barrichello now for 8th place, but both drivers yet to make a pit stop. So Daniel Ricciardo definitely 2-stopping. And what will the other drivers be doing? If this triggers a series of pit stops, then it's likely that the whole field will be 2-stopping in this race. Robert Kubica into the pits as well. He's another on a 2-stop. And Sato right behind Lewis Hamilton. I think Sato can definitely make 8th place, probably even higher than that. Maybe even 7th place actually, Jenson Button. That's your race leader into the pits. Matt Webber takes the lead of the race. Now is Alonso going into the pits? Well, that's one of the Super Aguris. It's Felipe Massa making a pit stop. And Matthias Lauda as well. So we are seeing a few pit stops underway. Timo Glock also in the pits. So Daniel Ricciardo, essentially the trigger for drivers making pit stops. Let's see what other drivers do. Is Kobayashi going to come into the pits as well? No, not this lap. So for the moment, he moves up to 4th place as Bianchi versus Barrichello. That's down the main straight. That's a fantastic view from the right-hand side of the cockpit. You can see Barrichello lurking at him like a shark. Jenson, that's Fernando Alonso going through Arrabbiatas there. Paul Di Resta, Corintao. That's nicely done through there from the Scotsman. The driver from Bathgate, Midlothian. Around that area anyway. So briefly, the battle between Barrichello and Bianchi. That's now for 5th, as pit stops are underway. Paul Di Resta not making a pit stop. He carries on for another tour. It's Mark Webber. He's into the pits. Race leader Mark Webber. And is Fernando Alonso going to follow him in? I suspect so. And Barrichello has a look at Bianchi going into Scarperia. And Alonso carries on. Alonso takes the lead of the race in that Super Aguri. There's been much improved ever since the 3 races before. So I think it was Austria. Austria, Hungary, and then this one. So yeah, Super Aguri is definitely... Oh, Kobayashi all locked up going into the pit lane from 4th place, briefly. But that will move to, well, it's Jules Bianchi into the pits as Rubens Barrichello carries on for another lap. So Renault more heavily fuelled and quicker than the Williams. So Renault's got some good pace in the hands of Rubens Barrichello. and depends how far he can go, but I suspect the whole field will fundamentally two-stop in this race. Although it is a long pit lane, so you could be seeing one or two drivers chancing it on a one-stop. But Jenson Button in second place and having stopped already, so looking quite good. There's Lewis Hamilton, 8th place now, Lewis Hamilton, but yet to make a pit stop. He's behind Matthias Lauda, who has stopped, so looking good for the Honda to score quite a few points. As Hamilton exits Cervelli and into the Arrabbiata corners. And just trying to see the rest of the field. So, we'll wait a few more laps before reviewing the order, as Sergio Perez gets it a bit wide at San Donato, into Luca and Poggio Secco. With Emirates sponsoring on the outside of those corners. And if you're on an Emirates flight, you could get a Heineken 0.0. Planes do serve alcohol, even if it is alcohol-free beer. So, into the pits comes Rubens Barrichello, 1 lap more than Jules Bianchi, so for Renault's sake he'll be hoping for a quicker pit stop than Bianchi, and a good in-lap for Rubens in order to get ahead of the Williams. I suspect so, because low fuel does tend to be a bit better than the new tyres. But you can see Rubens dropping down quite a few positions. There is Jules Bianchi, that's the driver we'd like to see, and let's see if he can remain ahead of Barrichello, or if Rubens will get the jump on Jules down the main straight. And it's slightly the wrong camera angle, but into San Donato goes Bianchi, and the question is he ahead or is he behind Rubens Barrichello? Well, he's turning left at Luca. As into the pits comes Fernando Alonso. So the Super Aguri coming into the pits a little bit later than some drivers, end of lap 23, 4 laps later than Daniel Ricciardo, for instance. So a good stint for Fernando in this opening phase of the race, and making the first of what probably will be 2 stops. But the 2 Toyotas retake the lead of the race. Jenson Button less than 4 seconds ahead of Mark Webber, but that's probably because Webber stayed out for a lap longer than Jenson. As into the pits and all locked up goes Lewis Hamilton from that brief 7th place. Probably 6th place actually. Matthias Lauda did rejoin behind Lewis before that pit stop. Or maybe it was the other way around, but either way, Lauda in 6th place behind Takuma Sato, who's now up to 5th place, but remember Sato made that early pit stop to replace a damaged front wing. And meanwhile Alonso rejoined in 3rd, as expected, between Mark Webber and Felipe Massa, but Massa's made up some time on the Spaniard in the pit stop sequence. So good set of outlaps for Felipe Massa's moved into within 2.2 seconds of Alonso. And has the gap just gone down dramatically between Jenson Button and Mark Webber, because that is just a 1/10 of a second as they went through the last sector point. I think Jenson's made a mistake somewhere, and now there is a battle for the lead between the 2 Toyotas. As through, there's Jules Bianchi, and he did rejoin behind Rubens Barrichello after that pit stop. So Renault with a good in-lap, well, Barrichello with a good in-lap, Renault with a good pit stop, and that has put Barrichello in a net 11th place at the moment, possibly 10th once Sato comes into the pits, as off the track briefly goes Bianchi, and Sato into the pits. So Takuma Sato, that's making his 2nd pit stop, and there it is, battle for the race lead between the 2 Toyotas, but we switch to Paul Di Resta, slightly wide at the apex, going through Borgo San Lorenzo, Materassi and Borgo San Lorenzo, now through Casanova and Cervelli, and Sato coming out of the pits in due course, and probably rejoin behind, he may be in touch with Barrichello, but he's behind Barrichello, could rejoin ahead of Bianchi, but wait for Bianchi to come through perhaps? No, Sato has jumped Jules Bianchi. So, 2 Toyotas. They've already hit each other at least once this season at Donington. Are they going to do it again? Well, we may find out at the exit of Buccina and the exit of lap 25 of the race. Jenson Button, that's the overhead shot of him. But somewhere right on his 6 is Mark Webber. Now through Buccina. Jenson Button, It's the apex well, and drivers tend to run all of the exit curb, almost kissing the gravel, and Gilles Bianchi's having an absolute mare of a time. Running wide at Casanova there. And 3/4 of a tenth is the gap between Button and Webber as they cross the start-finish line, and I don't think Webber was really within striking distance. Maybe he was actually. Mark Webber has just taken the lead of the race, going through in, that's probably on San Donato, and Jenson Button and goodness me, we don't know where to look at the moment as Christian Albers comes into the pits. That was from 8th place, and I'm trying to work out whether Albers had to come in early because of an unscheduled issue, but he must have done. And where are the pit crew? Well, they're invisible because off go one of his tyres and on come one of his tyres. But yeah, significant moment in the race. Mark Webber taking the lead of the race. There's Alonso, who is catching up to the two Toyotas now, that they are battling with each other going through Correntino. And they're approaching a back marker. I suspect that's Paul Di Resta to lap. But yeah, Jenson closing in on Mark Webber, who defends a little bit going through Buccina. And Jenson understeering as well. And off the track goes Jenson, but he's going to survive that one. But he's going to lose a lot of time to Webber. That is a costly mistake. And now where is Alonso in that? Not close enough. So how much time did that lose Jenson? 3 seconds, pretty much. He'd lost to Mark Webber thanks to that mistake at Buccina. And what we're looking at are battling Albers and Perez, I think. Or is it Timo Glock? It's Sergio Perez. Glock is up in 6th place at the moment. So this is a battle for 12th place, 13th place actually. And I suspect both of these will be catching, well, they lost a second to Gilles Bianchi in that mid-sector of the lap. I suspect because of the battling. There is Gilles, and his T-cam is disappearing and has reappeared. So Gilles is having a bit of an interesting time at the moment. And it seems that the top 4 have compressed a little bit after the first round of pit stops, because Webber is 3.5 seconds ahead of Button, Alonso 3 behind Button, and Massa 3.3, well now 3.4 behind Alonso. So it's a little bit closer than it was about 10 or so laps ago. But really, the Japanese teams are really showing their supremacy at the moment. You got 5 out of the 6 drivers who race for Japanese teams in the top 5, headed by 2 Toyotas, 2 Super Aguris, and 1 Honda. The other Honda is in the race. It's down in 10th place at the moment, but Sato's quite quick in this race, so he could make his way back up the order. And Massa locking up a little bit going into San Donato, but no real problems for himself. And there's a battle for 6th about to happen soon. Timo Glock versus Daniel Ricciardo. The gap just 3/10 of a second between those two. I wonder where Ricciardo's going to make his move. The moves have tended to be happening on the start-finish straight. It's 1.2 kilometres long. And which corner is Mark Webber going through? I think that is Scarperia and Palagio. I'll double check that once again. It's those S's that I tend to struggle with. Palagio, yeah. Now through the pith path. I haven't come across that name yet because it's just an acceleration zone between Correntino and Buccina as Albers goes wide at San Donato, running along the grass and curb and surviving for another day. Yeah, the pith path at 13 and 14, that's the Biondetti corners. And Jenson, I think, has made another mistake somewhere because he is 5.3 seconds now behind Webber and just 1.5 seconds ahead of Fernando Alonso. So Jenson's struggling a little bit in this mid-sector of the race, and if he continues to struggle, then that is good news for Kimi Räikkönen and Takuma Sato because, as mentioned before, they sit 22 points behind Button in the championship. With Räikkönen out of the race, he could desperately do with Button having a major issue. As Christian Albers, that is way wide at Correntino, onto the runoff, back onto the circuit. Sort of. Just taking a bit of grass for good measure, and he will have Robert Kubica chasing him down for a little bit. into Buccina. Yeah, they don't take the extreme outside line. I think all the grip is on the inside, so drivers making sure they get that. Jenson Button into Correntaya. Looked as if he'd hit the apex no problem, as we switched to Jules Bianchi doing the exact opposite at San Donato. He's in 12th place at the moment, and he's in a bit of a lonely 12th place. He's somewhere behind Lewis Hamilton, but somewhere ahead of Christian Albers. That's through turns 4 and 5, Materassi and Borgo San Lorenzo. Mark Webber, race leader, into San Donato, and he shows Jules Bianchi how to go through San Donato properly, hitting the apex no problem, and then hitting more apexes, also without a problem. Ricciardo's not managed to make a move on Timo Glock just yet. He is now 3/4 of a second behind the Ferrari driver, who's performing quite well in this race. Glock up in 6th, Ricciardo 7th. But Kobayashi's coming into play now, so there's going to be a 3-way battle for 6th place soon. And actually, Glock is not that far behind Lauda, just half a second, so there's a 4-way battle for 5th place. And if Barrichello and Sato get a move on, then they could put themselves in the action as well, particularly Sato, who's got a quick car underneath him and is probably going to be making his second scheduled pit stop later than the drivers in front. 2 laps in a row where Jules Bianchi has not hit the apex of San Donato. You're going to be seeing quite a bit of that. Jules, a fairly inexperienced driver compared to some of these drivers, but he's done okay. He's had a 4th place at Suzuka, and he's had some other results as well. He's had a 9th at Adelaide, but could have been a 5th. And he's had another point score as well, and that was in 8th place at Silverstone. So Jules doing okay. Certainly not on Heidfeld's level, but he's certainly not disgraced himself. That was going through 2 and 3, Luca and Poggio Secco. That was Jenson Button. Now back to Bianchi, wide at Correntaya. And all over the exit curb there. Through Biandetti now, no problems there. Let's see how Buccina works out for Bianchi. There's the outside, now the inside. That was okay. Hitting the apex quite well, so just struggling with a bit of rhythm is Bianchi, as he sits 8.5 seconds, probably more than 9 seconds now behind Lewis Hamilton. As through Biandetti goes Mark Webber, and about to exit Buccina and 3 laps in a row Bianchi's had an issue at San Donato. Yeah, Webber is about to exit lap 31 and enter lap 32 of the race. Oh, off the track goes Bianchi at Poggio Secco. Now through Materassi and Borgo San Lorenzo. And he's going to slip to more than 13 seconds now behind Lewis Hamilton. There's 2nd place Jenson Button, and he is 1.8 seconds ahead of Fernando Alonso, but he's got a bit of traffic in front of him. It's the Toro Rosso of Paul Di Resta. Whereabouts will Jenson catch up to him? That's Alonso. That looked a bit wide at the exit of Poggio Secco. Let's see if it's translated in any time loss. Oh yes, it has. About a second lost there. So Alonso pushing a bit hard to try and catch up to 2nd place Jenson Button. And theoretically he has got younger tyres than the Brit, but the Toyota is probably the best car in the field, and that was a bit of a tricky place to lap Paul Di Resta through Scarperia and Palagio. And now through Correntaya goes Button, Di Resta, a lap down, and Fernando Alonso. Alonso gained half a second on Button in that particular moment, and Di Resta's trying to unlap himself going into Buccina, but that's not to be advised because the Toro Rosso is not as quick a car as the Toyota. And we've hit 3/5 distance, lap 33 out of 55. Matthias Lauda versus Timo Glock. And where did Daniel Ricciardo go? That is a very, very good question. Where has Daniel Ricciardo gone? Or is that Takuma Sato versus Sergio Perez? Well, let's wait and find out. There is Ricciardo and Kamui Kobayashi. In fact, it was 8.7 seconds. It wasn't 0.7 of a second, the gap between Ricciardo and Glock. So no four-way battle, just two ways each end. Kobayashi was having a look at Ricciardo going into San Donato, and I don't think he made that one stick. Rubens Barrichello puffing his right front brake a little bit as he tries to stay ahead of Sato and at the same time try and catch up to Ricciardo and Kobayashi. But at the moment it probably is inevitable that Sato will get ahead of Barrichello at some point. Yeah, Sato's quicker at this stage of the race. As there goes Fernando Alonso. Which corner had he gone through? Well, he's going to turn left. Is that through Buccina? I think so. He's going to clamber all over the exit curb. And there's the pit lane entrance. Third place Fernando Alonso, and doing quite well in the Super Aguri as Glock versus Lauda once again. And Bianchi going through Casanova and Savelli. Bit wide at Casanova, but managed to stay on the circuit, but he has now got Sergio Perez lurking up to him for 12th place. There's going to be a battle between those two soon. As through Scarperia and Palagio. And now switch back to Fernando Alonso, 3rd place. Paul Di Resta is about to go a lap down on the Spaniard in due course. And meanwhile, Massa, nice and lonely in 4th place. He's going to, if it stays like this, he's going to contribute quite heavily to Super Aguri's battle against Force India for 4th in the championship. And how many podiums has Massa had this season? He's had a few. He's had a 3rd at Adelaide, and then he's had 1 this season. He's had 2 5th places at Monaco and the European Grand Prix at Donington. Meanwhile, the battle for 7th continues between Ricciardo and Kobayashi as Lewis Hamilton goes through the Arrabbiata corners now. And he sits in 11th place at the moment, 9.2 seconds behind Takuma Sato. But quite a way ahead of Jules Bianchi, and Hamilton's chance of points depends on if there are any more retirements in front of him, and with 21 or so laps to go, it could happen. Interestingly, and despite that spate in the opening phase of the race, still just the 6 retirements, and they were all non-mechanical as well. So drivers pushing a bit too hard in the early stage of the race. And Glock has just taken Lauda for 5th place. You can see it on the ticker at the bottom. And I think Lauda must have made a mistake because he's 2 seconds behind Glock. So obviously Lauda pushing a bit too hard to try and stay ahead of Glock and pressured into a mistake somewhere. That was somewhere in the first sector, because there you can see Matthias Lauda going through the Arrabbiata corners. So I wonder if it happened probably at the exit of Poggio Secco. He's now going through Correntino and dropped another 6/10 in that middle sector. And Alonso still doing what he can to try and catch up to Jenson Button for 2nd place. It's now less than 2 seconds. Jenson now 7.3 behind Mark Webber now. So yeah, Jenson struggling a little bit on his 2nd set of tyres. As Takuma Sato now challenges Rubens Barrichello for 9th place, going through Buccina. He'll be on the main straight where he'll be able to challenge the Renault. And how much... Let's see the power difference between the Honda and the Renault. Well, let's not, because we're going to switch to a Cosworth-powered Super Aguri, going through Savelli and into the Arrabbiatas. And now Glock some 10 seconds behind Felipe Massa. Massa can sit very comfortably in 4th place and stay very consistent up there. And what's happening further down? Well, there is Takuma Sato. He didn't quite get ahead of Rubens Barrichello down that main straight, so now he's got to wait until probably the start of the next lap to try and overtake the Renault driver. Timo Glock getting a bit loose at the exit of Scarperia. And now goes through Correntino. You can see the big grandstand on the left, and that overlooks the start-finish straight and the pits and paddock facilities. And now we switch back to Jenson Button. He's pulled out a little bit over Fernando Alonso, now 2 seconds pretty much. 2.043 as he goes through Poggio Secco. And now Takuma Sato going through Buccina and about to start another lap. This will be his 37th lap. And still in 10th place. Now, where is Rubens Barrichello? I think he was about to shape up for a move. As the battle for 7th continues between Ricciardo and Kobayashi. Do suspect that Kobayashi has the quicker car at this stage. Probably even more favourable compound tyres as well, because McLaren did choose the hard tyres for this particular race meeting. McLaren definitely needed to use the remainder of the upgrade tokens in the final 6 races. And I suspect they will, depending on what they choose. Next couple of races, next 3 races actually, they've got a lot of long straights. You've got Spa, Monza, and then Canada. And in fact, is there another one as well between those two? There isn't. So, yeah, the remaining 6 races, you've got Spa, you've got Monza first, then Spa, and then the Montreal circuit, Ile de Notre Dame, and then Long Beach for the Californian Grand Prix, then Road America, we stay in America for the United States Grand Prix, and then the final race at Interlagos in Brazil. A popular championship showdown spot. Although if it carries on like this, with Jenson Button up in 2nd and Sato and Raikkonen struggling to get points at this rate, then the championship could well be decided a bit earlier than Interlagos. So yeah, Jenson definitely has the quicker car compared to Alonso, but struggling a bit on his 2nd set of tyres. A bit inconsistent. It's 2.2 seconds, the gap between those two. And remember, it was Alonso who pitted some 3 laps later than Jenson Button. And if that pattern's to be continued, then Alonso could well steal 2nd place off of Jenson Button in the 2nd round of pit stops. Meanwhile, Kobayashi's trying to steal 7th place off of Daniel Ricciardo. Going through Corintao now. Oh, he's pressured Ricciardo into that mistake and Kobayashi takes it. So McLaren has got 1 car in the points and it's up to 7th. How far behind Matthias Lauda is Kamui Kobayashi? Quite a way behind, I imagine. We'll find out once they cross the start-finish line. And Lauda dropped to... He's still, despite losing that 5th place to... And Kobayashi in the pits actually, so that was on his in-lap. So Ricciardo retaking that 7th place. And if he puts in a good set of in-laps, then he could jump Kobayashi, and Kobayashi's going to have to go through all that pain all over again. And remember, it was Ricciardo who triggered the first round of pit stops, so obviously the Toro Rosso team put quite a bit of fuel on board the Australian's car. Now then, that's Perez versus Kubica down the main straight, and behind is Christian Albers. As Mark Webber comes out of the final corner, and into the pits comes Mark Webber, so he's built up a 7.5 second lead over Jenson Button. And Jenson pitted first out of those two, and this time around it's Mark Webber who comes into the pits. Jenson will take the lead, and Rubens Barrichello, there he is in 8th place, still ahead of Takuma Sato, so he's doing a good job at staying ahead of the Honda driver. No mistake into Corintao, unlike that of Daniel Ricciardo. And there's your new race leader, Jenson Button, and into the pits now comes Timo Glock from 5th place. He was some way ahead of Matthias Lauda, but only 2 seconds actually, and Lauda continues. So, can Lauda put in a good set of in-laps? And Ricciardo into the pits as well, so it only went 1 lap longer than Kamui Kobayashi. So keep an eye out on the ticker to see if Ricciardo does jump Kobayashi in this 2nd round of pit stops. Through the Arabiatas, that's Felipe Massa we're looking at. Solid drive from the Brazilian, no mistakes from what I could see. And Gil Bianchi, he'll be glad to get rid of that set of tyres from 12th place. And there's a battle down the start-finish straight. And is that Kobayashi making his way past Kubica, or was it somebody else? Yeah, Ricciardo's jumped Kobayashi as I suspected he would, as into the pits comes Alonso. So Alonso the first out of himself and Button to make the second pit stop, as Felipe Massa briefly assumes second place, but he'll have a pit stop to make. And it'd be important for him to get out ahead of that Williams, who rejoins in 15th place. And there is the battle of the 10th between Ricciardo and Kobayashi. It was close, and it still is close, and Kobayashi will be desperate to get back ahead. But where can he do it? Can he do it into Corintio? No, not close enough. No chance through the Biandetti flick-flack pith path. Mini chicane. Whatever you like to call it, as Hamilton is into the pits. And who are we on board with here? Is it Matthias Lauda we're on board with? I think it was. It wasn't, it was somebody else. So that's second place Felipe Massa. I think it was Jenson Button we were on board with, actually. And now side by side, and Kobayashi takes Ricciardo. So that was on the lap after Ricciardo jumped Kobayashi in the pits. Kobayashi pouncing on him quite immediately. And he's quite a way behind Timo Glock, so I think Kobayashi's set for whichever position he is in there. He's 11.3 seconds behind Timo Glock at this point. So, yeah, I think Timo Glock's probably safe in either 5th or 6th, depending on what Matthias Lauda can do on his set of in-laps. And I think it's worth keeping an eye on Jenson Button as well, because he's not yet made his second pit stop. Obviously took on quite a bit of fuel compared to Mark Webber in that first pit stop. As into the pits comes Rubens Barrichello from, I think it was briefly 6th place, still ahead of Takuma Sato, but Sato, now with that lighter car, should jump the Renault driver in the second round of pit stops. As Mark Webber goes through Casanova and Cervelli. And into the Arrabbiatas. There's Takuma Sato. He needs to put in a good in-lap now in order to get ahead of Rubens Barrichello. Barrichello behind Kobayashi and behind Ricciardo. Just about though, so Rubens Barrichello's got a chance of Daniel Ricciardo in the closing stages of the race. As Jenson Button comes into the pits from the race lead. Now, where is he going to rejoin in relation to Mark Webber? And Felipe Massa also comes into the pits. So the top two pitting, and that should put Mark Webber back into the lead of the race, as Barrichello, that looked a bit wide at the exit of Borgo San Lorenzo. And now he has got a Force India right behind him. It's Christian Albers. And Barrichello is actually 3.7 seconds behind Daniel Ricciardo, as Matthias Lauda also comes into the pits. So let's see where Lauda rejoins in relation to Timo Glock, because that battle is not really decided yet. Still pit indicator on for Lauda, and Jenson Button rejoined in second between Mark Webber and Fernando Alonso's locking up his front left tyre through Buccina. Is that Daniel Ricciardo? I think it is Daniel Ricciardo. It was indeed. And how much time? Oh, into the pits comes Kubica. And Ricciardo had lost about a second to Barrichello on that lap. And that Renault into the pits, Kubica. So Glock has jumped Lauda for 6th, which should be 5th place once Sato makes his final pit stop. As Paul Di Resta comes into the pits from 14th, will drop down to 15th behind Bianchi. And is there another driver in 16th place, or did that one retire from the race? No, it was Sergio Perez, so yep, still the 6 retirements. The 2 BMW Saubers of Montoya and Hulkenberg. Then the McLaren of Kimi Räikkönen, significantly. And then Sebastian Vettel, Nick Heidfeld, and one other driver. Which one was that? Adrian Sutil. And I think that was a collision that he had with someone. Sato into the pits. So quite late, but remember he had that front wing dislodged in the early part of the race, so he could run longer to an extent, but where will he rejoin? He should rejoin ahead of Rubens Barrichello. It'll be quite close with Daniel Ricciardo, actually. So Sato's got a chance of 8th place at the exit of the pits. 8th place, is that 8th? It is indeed 8th, so Ricciardo dropping down to 9th ultimately, as Lewis Hamilton not had the best of runs in the past few races, just hasn't got his Red Bull set up right, it seems. And that's confirmation of Sato ahead of Daniel Ricciardo right there. Just going back to the top lot, Webber holds a 3-second lead over Jenson Button, and Button himself is just 1.6 seconds ahead of Fernando Alonso. So Alonso in a Super Guri putting in another good drive, and could well be on course for a good result as Jenson Button sets a new fastest lap of the race. There's a battle for the lead approaching in the last 11 laps. Mark Webber versus Jenson Button, but Jenson needs a bit more if he's going to catch and pass Webber for the race win. And Alonso doing a brilliant job to keep up with Jenson as well, so let's see what happens in these final 11 laps as we look at Christian Albers going through Biandetti and then shortly into Buccina as Alonso, Casanova, then Cervelli. And oh, Webber, what's happened to Mark Webber? Is that a mechanical issue for Mark Webber? Is an off? Let's have a look. So going through 4 and 5, that's Borgo San Lorenzo Materassi. Well, it's Materassi, he ran wide. And then, Mark Webber making the mistake from the race lead. So he's down to second. Jenson Button in the lead of the race. And that will do his championship absolute perfection. So good spot there from the director. And into Scarperia and Pelagio goes the new race leader Jenson Button. And further back, Kobayashi versus Sato. That's going to happen in the next few laps. Battle for 7. Oh, off the track goes Jenson Button at Correntaio. So immediately after taking the lead, Jenson has bottled it. And now he's got Fernando Alonso right behind him. Is Alonso going to challenge for second place? Well, we've got Takuma Sato versus Kamui Kobayashi going through Cervelli and now into Arrabbiata. So this race really coming alive in the last few laps. As there's your race leader Mark Webber, Jenson Button is second, and now Alonso just a quarter of a second behind Jenson Button. The top three separated by just 1.5 seconds. And we're going to have a look at this battle, it seems. So Mark Webber, that's going through Poggio Secco, now into Materassi. And Jenson, he'd hung on to that one for second between himself and Fernando Alonso. But Jenson on the fresher tyres compared to Webber, I suspect he is going to catch up to the Australian, and we are set for a grandstand finish. Something's happened to Sato. He's dropped down behind Daniel Ricciardo. He's into the pits again. So Takuma Sato is suffering a mechanical issue, it seems, and he's into the pits, as is Christian Albers. So it's all kicking off. And that's moved Hamilton up into 9th place. How's he got ahead of Rubens Barrichello? Hamilton's having its races coming good. Oh, that's what's happened. Barrichello's suffered a blown engine. So it's all kicking off here. So Sato, that's his mechanical issue. Into the pits comes the Honda driver. So that won't do his championship any good. And there's Barrichello pulling off with an engine failure. Bit smoky, so it looks like a water leak, but it's obviously done damage to the engine. So that may actually keep Takuma Sato in the points somehow. As a new fastest lap, Jenson Button, he's right behind Mark Webber once again. There's confirmation water leak, but we call that an engine failure in this business. And what of the rest of the order? Well, Felipe Massa still running nicely in 4th place, but there's your battle for the race lead. Mark Webber, Jenson Button. And Button wants this for his championship bid. Neither of these two drivers have won a championship, but Jenson Button is in the far more favourable position because he is some 56 or so points ahead of Mark Webber in the championship. Yep, exactly 56 points. And if these two are not careful, as Jenson has a speculative look at the inside of Scarperia, then Fernando Alonso could take advantage and take his first win of the season, but Alonso dropping back a little bit. Looks as if the two Toyotas have got their rhythm. And I must say, Timo Glock having a good race in 5th place, as Button has a look at the inside of Buccina, but that's not really an overtaking spot, and Button dropping back a little bit. Yellow flag's cleared. 8 laps to go at the exit of this particular one. And I'm just looking at Glock versus Lauda. I don't think that's settled just yet. Lauda's 1.3 seconds as Mark Webber choosing a defensive line going into San Donato that time around. Through Poggio Secco. That was the parked Rubens Barrichello there, so his car in a relatively safe position. And now Mark Webber going through Casanova now into Savelli. I'd forgotten turn 5 then. It was Borgo San Lorenzo. There's a lot of Italian names to recognise for these corners, but I prefer them to corner numbers because it gives the corners a bit more personality. And once again, looking at the inside of Scarperia goes Jenson Button, but it's not an overtaking spot unless you've got a much more powerful engine. The true overtaking spot is at the exit of the Buccina corner onto the main straight, and it's on that main straight where you can make the overtake stick. There's a couple of kinks on that main straight, slight right and a slight left before San Donato, so you've got to time it right at the exit of Buccina. There's 15th and last, Paul Di Resta going through Biandetti into Buccina. Jenson was actually 4/10. Oh, and there's that Alonso into the pits from 3rd place. It is Alonso having an issue now, and that's going to move Felipe Massa up into 3rd place. So poor Fernando Alonso suffering a late mechanical drama. And that's pretty much settled it in the favour of the two Toyotas, but which of the two Toyotas is going to win? That's Paul Di Resta exiting San Donato, and where is Alonso going to rejoin? He's dropping down the order. Glock now up to 4th, Lauda up to 5th, and Alonso rejoins in 6th. So that is very unlucky there for the Spaniard. That's Paul Di Resta, 15th place, and quite lonely in 15th place now, 15th and last for the Toro Rosso driver. And Mark Webber pulling out a little bit over Button, so he's definitely got his groove in the final few laps, but remember Jenson has the fresher tyres, so he could just be biding his time. And that's Robert Kubica, who's right behind Jules Bianchi for 11th place. I think he was shaping up for a move on what would be the outside into San Donato, but that didn't quite work out for him, unless he switches to the inside, which he does. And Kubica up to 11th, Bianchi locking up a little bit going into San Donato. And behind, that's Christian Albers in 13th place. Perez 14th, Di Resta 15th. That's the order for those outside of the top 11. Meanwhile, the order of the top 10, Mark Webber, Jenson Button, Felipe Massa now 3rd. Could get his 2nd podium of the season. They have to say Alonso deserved it a bit more, but Massa has driven a very good race as well. Timo Glock 4th, Lauda 5th. That battle is now half a second apart. So Timo Glock versus Matthias Lauda for 4th place. And then Fernando Alonso. He's not far behind those two. Alonso could still get a 4th place out of this if he uses his new tyres well and gets ahead of them both. But look at this. Jenson Button is challenging into Correntaio, but Mark Webber defending that one. And now Jenson, this is his opportunity to take the lead of the race at the end of lap 50 or at the start of lap 51. Take your pick. As through Correntaio goes his new 3rd place driver, Felipe Massa, in the Super Aguri. And Super Aguri would retake Force India in the Constructors' Championship with a 3rd and a 6th place. In fact, just a few points out of those would have done it. But 5 laps remaining, Fernando Alonso. We need to see Jenson Button and Mark Webber because that is separated by very little. And Jenson's taken it! That was round the outside at the main straight. Let's have another look at that one. So, round the outside, and he got a very, very good run and slipstream out of Buccina. And then outside line for San Donato, but braver on the brakes. Jenson Button takes the lead of the race. Now can he stay there and not bottle it this time? And we got a nice replay of that as well. So, Jensen needs to pull away on his newer tyres compared to Mark Webber. Through Borgo San Lorenzo, and he's about to lap Sergio Perez for good measure. So Daniel Ricciardo, there he is in 8th place, could get some more points for Toro Rosso. Both Toro Rossos running in this race. Ricciardo 8th and Di Resta 15th and last, but that'll do their championship a bit of good. It will especially help them against BMW Sauber, who've once again shown that both drivers are driving the car beyond its limits. That's Button going through Corinthians, and he's got quite a comfortable lead over Mark Webber. Just needs to negotiate Sergio Perez, and he'll do it on the main straight, I think. And the gap between Webber and Massa is 8.5 seconds, but Massa just a bit too far back to make one final push. This is the battle for 4th place now between Glock and Lauda. That's going through Corinthians now, and Lauda looks as if he's going to shape up for a move at the exit of Buccina and on the main straight. And that was Jensen having lapped Perez, and now Mark Webber's got to do the same. So, through Buccina, Matthias Lauda. Let's see the front view, but is he going to jink to the left? I think he's just jinked to the left now. And the gap as they cross the line, less than 1/10 of a second. But I think it was just the wrong place to make the move there around the outside, and Glock's going to hang on to that one, I think. Bianchi versus Albers for 12th place, going through Scarperia and the Palagio corner, as Takuma Sato wrestling it through Biandetti. That's normally a flat-out corner, so he's pushing to try and make up for that unscheduled pit stop, which cost him probably a 7th place, I think. But yeah, they're both Sato and Raikkonen not having good races, and Jensen is going to move a long way clear of both of them. It'll be 47 points the gap, but Jensen's got 3 more laps to do in order to confirm that increase in points margin in the Drivers' Championship, as he sets a new fastest lap in the process. So Jensen, now that he's back in the lead, is enjoying himself, as Albers, that's a good shot of him going up the inside of Bianchi, going into San Donato. And Paul Di Resta nicely in last place, 15th, and he's 14.6 seconds behind Sergio Perez. Perez not having such a good race, which suggests to me, although Glock is up in 4th place, that Ferrari went just a tad too soft with their tyre compounds. Either that or Sergio Perez needs a bit more race pace experience. It looks like Sato settling for that 10th place. At the end of this one, it'll be 3 laps to go for him. As he approaches Buccina, there's the brake marker boards, but you brake close to the 50-metre board into Buccina. Very fast circuit, the slowest corner, probably we'll call it San Donato, I think the slowest corner. Maybe Corinthians, actually. It's a very, very fast circuit and very, very liked amongst drivers and the community of GP4. And the gap between Albers and Bianchi, 1.4 seconds, growing a bit. And new fastest lap once again for Jensen Button, as he extends to more than 2 seconds over Mark Webber. Just 2 more laps to go. He's got the Bianchi Williams to lap, and then a few more corners to go after that. Glock versus Lauda. This is Lauda on board with once again, and Glock doing well to hold on to that 4th place ahead of Matthias Lauda. And he has got, well, that's Alonso coming up alongside him. He's going to take 5th place, is he? Down the outside on the main straight, but the outside line, I think Alonso chose the wrong one there. So it's a 3-way battle for 4th place between Glock, Lauda and Alonso. Kobayashi in 7th place in the McLaren. Daniel Ricciardo 8th in the Toro Rosso. Lewis Hamilton 9th in the Red Bull. And Sato 10th in the Honda. So Honda will be getting 11 points out of this race, and then McLaren will be getting 6 points out of this one. And I think that should keep McLaren ahead of Honda in the championship. It would indeed, but the gap would go down from 10 points to 5 points. Jensen Button started his final lap now, and that is Sergio Perez we're looking at there. 14th place and a lap down on Jenson Button. And Mark Webber, actually. So yeah, this proving to be a bit of a significant race in terms of the championship battle, because Jenson Button will extend his lead to 40, it'll be 46 points actually, over Takuma Sato, because Sato is in 10th place, and looking on course to score just the 1 point, but Jenson Button scoring 25, moving 46 ahead of Sato, 47 ahead of Kimi Raikkonen. And 56 will extend to 63 points over Mark Webber. On board with Jenson from quite an unusual view for this series. We normally see quite innovative camera angles, but here we're looking at the T-cam, looking forwards of Jenson Button, and he's got one more corner to negotiate, Buccina corner. And how many wins will this be? Because he's won, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 races so far. Make that a 6, because on the main straight, Jenson Button takes a massive step towards his first ever championship in this series, with victory at Mugello. Mark Webber will come home in 2nd place, another Toyota 1-2, and their Constructors' Championship lead ever growing. 3rd place Felipe Massa, good result for him in the Super Aguri. That's to rest to 15th on the lap down, last of the runners actually. And this battle between Glock, Lauda and Alonso, it looks as if it's going to be in the favour of Timo Glock out of the final corner, and he's going to take 4th. I think Lauda's going to hang on to 5th place, and Alonso's going to take 6th place. It could have been a 3rd, but unlucky to suffer a late mechanical issue. 7th place will come home the McLaren at number 2. Not a bad drive actually from Kobayashi, and because he qualified way down in 20th place. He's obviously good in the races. 8th is Ricciardo, 9th Hamilton, and here comes Takuma Sato, about to cross the line and take 1 point. You never know, if things could go badly wrong for Jenson in the last 6 races, then that could be the most important point. And he's nicked the fastest lap from Button as well, so denies the Button the Grand Slam. And the last driver on the lead lap is Robert Kubica, comes home in 11th. In fact, Albers is the last driver on the lead lap, never mind. So yeah, Toyotas 1 and 2. 43 points gained for them. And that will move them quite a long way ahead of McLaren now, extending it by another 32 points. So that was the first ever Tuscan Grand Prix, and could see a very significant result in terms of the championship standings, with Jenson Button's 6th win of the season. And we'll have a little break, a mid-season test, an opportunity for teams to use more of their upgrade tokens if they have any left. And the next race will be staying in Italy for the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. So we shall see you then.